In the grim darkness of the far future, there exists a breed of warrior unlike any the galaxy has ever known. They are giants among men, angels of death clad in ceramite and adamantium, walking weapons forged in the crucible of the most advanced genetic science humanity has ever achieved. They are the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, and their existence is one of endless war, unwavering faith, and sacrifice beyond mortal comprehension. To understand what it means to be a Space Marine is to peer into an existence that transcends the boundaries of human experience. These warriors are not simply soldiers wearing advanced armor. They are post-human beings, transformed at the cellular level into living weapons whose every heartbeat serves the Imperium of man. Their lives are measured not in the peaceful passage of years, but in the thunder of bolter fire, the crash of power weapons against alien flesh, and the solemn rituals of a warrior monk culture that has endured for 10,000 years. But before we can truly grasp what it means to wear the power armor and bear the gene seed of the Emperor's finest, we must first understand where this journey begins. Every Space Marine was once mortal, once a child who gazed up at the stars from some distant world, unaware that their entire existence was about to be forever altered. The path from that moment of innocence to the full realization of what they would become is paved with trials that would break ordinary men, transformations that would horrify them, and an indoctrination so complete that by the end they would willingly embrace an eternity of war. This is the story of what it truly means to be a Space Marine, told not through the lens of myth and propaganda, but through the reality of transformed flesh, altered consciousness, and the weight of serving as humanity's ultimate defender in a galaxy that knows only war. The recruitment, from mortal to aspirant. The journey to becoming a Space Marine begins in ways as varied as the 1,000 chapters that serve the Imperium. On death worlds where survival itself is a daily struggle against hostile environments and predatory megafauna, recruiters watch for young warriors who demonstrate not just strength, but the cunning and will to survive against impossible odds. On feral worlds where primitive tribes war against each other with weapons of bronze and iron, the sky opens and armored giants descend, seeking those whose courage in battle marks them as worthy of ascension. In the towering hive cities that sprawl across countless civilized worlds, where billions live in squalor and violence, chapter scouts prowl the underhive looking for gang fighters whose ferocity and loyalty to their crew mark them as potential candidates. The recruitment age is critical and unforgiving. Aspirants must typically be selected between the ages of 10 and 14 years old, before their bodies have fully matured through natural puberty. This narrow window exists because the gene seed implantation process requires a young, developing body capable of accepting and integrating the foreign organs that will transform them. Too old, and the body rejects the modifications. Too young, and the child lacks the physical foundation necessary to survive the brutal trials ahead. For most chapters, recruitment is a sacred ritual steeped in tradition. The space wolves of Fenris seek young warriors from the brutal tribal cultures of their icebound world, watching for those who demonstrate the qualities of the ancient Fenrisian heroes. The Blood Angels recruit from the irradiated wastes and savage tribes of Baal and its moons, seeking those touched by the nobility and artistry that reflects their Primarch Sanguinius. The Ultramarines draw from the well-ordered worlds of Ultramar, selecting candidates who demonstrate not just martial prowess, but also tactical thinking and adherence to their structured culture. But regardless of the chapter or the world, all aspirants face the same fundamental reality. They are about to undergo trials that will push them to the absolute limits of human endurance, and most will not survive. The testing begins immediately, and it is designed to be lethal. Chapters do not want merely the strong or the brave. They want those who possess something deeper, something that cannot be trained or taught. They want warriors who will never surrender, never falter, and never question their service to the Emperor, even when facing horrors that would shatter ordinary minds. The trials vary wildly between chapters. Some lead their aspirants into deadly wildernesses, forcing them to survive for weeks or months with nothing but primitive weapons and their wits. Others pit them against each other in gladiatorial combat, knowing that only a fraction will emerge alive. The Blood Angels famously require their aspirants to cross the radioactive deserts of Baal to reach the chapter's fortress, the Arx Angelicum, a journey that claims the lives of most who attempt it. The Space Wolves throw their would-be recruits into the frozen wastes of Fenris, where they must survive long enough to be found by the chapter's recruiters or die trying. These trials serve multiple purposes. They test physical endurance, mental resilience, and the will to survive under conditions that would kill ordinary humans. But more importantly, they begin the process of psychological conditioning that will define a Space Marine's existence. From the moment an aspirant accepts the challenge, they are taught that death holds no terror, that suffering is to be endured without complaint, and that the only thing that matters is proving worthy of the chapter's gene seed. For those who survive the initial trials, tissue compatibility tests await. The gene seed of each chapter is descended from one of the 20 Primarchs created by the Emperor himself, and this genetic legacy is incompatible with most human physiologies. The tests are exhaustive and invasive, examining the aspirant's genetic makeup at the most fundamental level. Even among those who survive the physical trials, only a small percentage possess the biological compatibility necessary to proceed. Those who fail are often inducted into the chapter as serfs, doomed to serve the Space Marines they can never become. Those who pass move forward to the next stage of their transformation. Psychological screening follows. The chapter's chaplains and librarians probe the aspirant's mind, searching for the mental resilience that will allow them to withstand not just the physical transformation ahead, but the psycho-indoctrination that will reshape their very personality. They look for loyalty, for mental flexibility, for a capacity to absorb and internalize the chapter's doctrines. They also search for any hint of corruption, any weakness of will or character that might make the candidate vulnerable to the whispers of chaos. It is at this point that an aspirant truly understands the magnitude of what lies ahead. They have seen the Space Marines, these towering figures in power armor who move with a grace that belies their massive size. They have witnessed feats of strength and endurance that seem supernatural. They know that to join their ranks is to become something more than human. But what they cannot yet comprehend is the price of that transformation, the ways in which they will cease to be the person they once were and become, instead, a living weapon, a tool of the Emperor's will. The final acceptance as an aspirant marks a point of no return. The chapter takes possession of these young warriors completely. They are stripped of their former names, their former lives, their former identities. Everything they were before this moment becomes irrelevant. They are no longer children of their homeworlds, no longer members of their tribes or gangs or families. They belong entirely to the chapter now, body and soul, and the transformation that will remake them is about to begin in earnest. The trials, testing body and spirit. The period between acceptance as an aspirant and the beginning of gene seed implantation is not a time of rest or preparation in any conventional sense. Instead, it is a crucible in which the chapter tests and hones its future warriors through training regimens and trials that would kill or permanently cripple ordinary humans. This is where aspirants learn the first truth of what it means to become a Space Marine. The body is merely a tool to be pushed beyond all conceivable limits, and pain is simply information to be acknowledged and then ignored. The training facilities within a chapter's fortress monastery are deliberately designed to inflict maximum physical stress. Combat cages simulate the most hostile environments known to the Imperium. From the acid rain-soaked jungles of Deathworlds, to the crushing gravity of high-G planets, to the thin, freezing atmospheres of mountainous terrain. Aspirants drill in these chambers for hours at a time, their bodies struggling against environmental conditions that would kill unaugmented humans within minutes. This is not cruelty for its own sake, but preparation. A space marine must be able to fight anywhere, under any conditions, and that capability begins with conditioning that pushes the unenhanced human form to its absolute limits. Hand-to-hand combat training begins immediately and never truly ends. Aspirants face each other in bouts that are expected to result in serious injury. Broken bones are common, torn muscles expected, permanent scarring guaranteed. The chapter's apothecaries stand ready to provide medical attention, but only after each bout concludes. An aspirant who yields due to pain is judged unworthy and discarded. The training serves to teach them to fight through injuries that would incapacitate normal soldiers, to continue pressing their attack even as their body screams for them to stop. But the trials extend far beyond physical combat. Aspirants are subjected to deprivation exercises that test their mental endurance. They are kept awake for days at a time, forced to perform complex tactical exercises while their minds fog with exhaustion. They are isolated in sensory deprivation chambers for extended periods, experiencing the crushing weight of absolute silence and darkness that can break even the strongest will. They undergo exposure to extreme heat and cold, learning to control their body's responses through force of will alone. Throughout all of this, the chapter's chaplains and veteran brothers observe, making notes on which aspirants demonstrate the qualities the chapter values most. They watch for signs of leadership, for tactical thinking under pressure, for the ability to function as part of a unit, even under the most chaotic conditions. They also watch for flaws, for any hint of weakness that might make an aspirant unsuitable for gene seed, implantation. The trials are designed to reveal everything about a candidate's character, and those found wanting are removed without ceremony or explanation. The psychological conditioning begins in earnest during this period. Aspirants undergo their first sessions in the hypnomat, a specialized chamber that uses hypnotic suggestion and psychosomatic interaction to begin reshaping their minds. In these sessions, they are exposed to images and sounds designed to instill absolute loyalty to the Emperor and their chapter. They begin to internalize the doctrines and battle lore that will guide them throughout their service. More importantly, they begin to learn how to shut down their fear response, to control their autonomic nervous system, to treat their own body as a machine to be commanded, rather than a source of limits and discomfort. The memory training that occurs during this period is particularly intense. Space Marines are expected to remember vast amounts of tactical data, the layouts of enemy fortifications studied for mere minutes, the exact position of squad members in the chaos of battle, the words of prayers and litanies that must be recited at specific moments. To enable this, aspirants undergo exercises designed to develop photographic memory, to train their minds to catalogue and recall information with perfect accuracy. They learn to enter focused mental states where they can review stored memories, as if rewatching a vid recording, a skill that will serve them throughout their service. Some chapters incorporate unique trials that reflect their particular culture or combat doctrine. The Imperial Fists famously require aspirants to undergo the Trial of the Talon, where they must scale the sheer walls of their fortress monastery on Inwit using only primitive climbing gear, a test that claims many lives but ensures those who pass possess the determination and pain tolerance the chapter values. The Salamanders expose their aspirants to the volcanic fires of Nocturne, testing their ability to withstand extreme heat and forge weapons in the chapter's traditional manner. The Raven Guard require aspirants to demonstrate stealth and infiltration skills, teaching them to move silently through hostile terrain and strike from concealment. Throughout all these trials, aspirants begin to bond with one another in ways that will define their future service. They learn to trust their brothers absolutely, to function as a unit where each member knows their role and executes it without hesitation. They share suffering, share small victories, share the knowledge that most of them will not survive to see full implantation. This creates bonds deeper than mere friendship, connections forged in shared hardship that will endure even as the transformation ahead changes them into something beyond human. The trials also begin to separate aspirants from their former humanity in subtle but profound ways. They start to think differently, to value things that ordinary humans would find incomprehensible. Personal comfort becomes irrelevant. The fear of death becomes something to be acknowledged and dismissed rather than a force that shapes behavior. The capacity for mercy toward enemies begins to erode, replaced by the understanding that the enemies of the Emperor deserve only death. These changes are intentional, part of the psychological foundation that will support the far more radical transformations to come. By the time an aspirant completes the trial period and is judged ready for gene seed implantation, they have been fundamentally changed from the person they were when recruitment began. They are harder, colder, more focused. They have watched brothers die in training and learned to process that death as simply part of the winnowing process that creates Space Marines. They have endured suffering that would leave permanent psychological scars on ordinary humans and emerged ready for more. They have begun to see themselves not as individuals with personal desires and dreams, but as future servants of the Emperor whose only purpose is war. And yet, they are still recognizably human. They still possess their original bodies, unmodified by the gene seed that will soon transform them. They still experience emotions in ways that ordinary people would understand. They still, in some sense, remember who they were before they came to the chapter. All of that is about to change in ways they cannot possibly anticipate, as the implantation process begins and their transformation into post-human warriors truly commences. The transformation, the implantation process. The transformation of a human into a Space Marine is one of the most complex and invasive medical procedures ever devised by the Imperium. It involves the implantation of 19 genetically engineered organs, each designed to enhance a specific aspect of human physiology. These organs, grown from the chapter's precious gene seed stock, are implanted over a period of years in a specific sequence, each building on the changes wrought by those that came before. The process is agonizing, dangerous, and fundamentally irreversible. Once it begins, an aspirant will either emerge as a Space Marine or die in the attempt. The implantation sequence is carefully controlled, with specific organs introduced at specific ages to maximize the chances of successful integration. What makes this process particularly harrowing is that for many of the neural implants, the aspirant must be awake during surgery, as the use of painkillers would interfere with the delicate neural connections being established. The rationale is clinical. The aspirant's conscious mind must be present to help integrate the new organ with existing biological systems. The reality is hours of consciousness during invasive surgery, feeling every cut, every probe, every connection being made within their own body. The first implant is the secondary heart, also called the maintainer. This fist-sized organ is implanted in the chest cavity and connected to the pulmonary and circulatory systems. Its purpose is simple but vital. It provides redundancy. A Space Marine whose primary heart is damaged or destroyed can continue fighting, sustained by this backup organ. It also enables them to survive in low-oxygen environments by pumping oxygenated blood more efficiently. The surgery to implant it is, mercifully, one of the few that can be performed under anesthesia, but the recovery is brutal. For weeks after implantation, the aspirant's chest burns with every breath as their body adjusts to having two hearts beating in different rhythms, slowly synchronizing into a new pattern. The os modula comes next, a small organ implanted in the chest that secretes hormones affecting bone growth and fusion. Over the following years, it will cause the aspirant's skeleton to grow larger and denser, bones thickening and becoming significantly harder than normal human bone. The rib cage fuses into a solid protective cage of bone plates rather than individual ribs, and the long bones of the arms and legs elongate. This process is agonizing, essentially forcing the body to undergo a second, far more extreme puberty. Aspirants experience constant bone pain as their skeletons reshape themselves, and many suffer from the grinding sensation of bones shifting and fusing inside their bodies. The biscopea is implanted into muscle tissue and triggers explosive muscle growth. Combined with the skeletal changes, this transforms the aspirant's physique from that of a human teenager to something approaching the massive form of a full space marine. But this muscle growth comes at a cost. The aspirant must consume vast quantities of food to fuel the transformation, and the pain of muscles tearing and rebuilding themselves is unrelenting. Training continues throughout this process, as the developing muscles must be stressed and used to ensure proper development. The hemastomen is a small organ about the size of a golf ball implanted in the chest and connected to the circulatory system. Its function is to modify the aspirant's blood chemistry, making it far more efficient at carrying oxygen and clotting. When later organs are implanted, the hemastomen will enable the production of Laraman cells, specialized blood cells that can seal wounds almost instantly. The aspirant feels this implant working every time their heart beats, as their blood begins to change, becoming thicker, more viscous, tinged with a slight metallic taste when it reaches their mouth. The Laraman's organ is that later implant, creating the Laraman cells that will make a space marine's blood clot almost instantaneously when exposed to air. This gives them the ability to survive wounds that would kill ordinary humans through blood loss. Watching these cells work for the first time is an eerie experience for many aspirants. They see a training wound seal itself within seconds. The bleeding stopping as if a biological switch had been flipped. The catalepsian node is implanted at the base of the brain and fundamentally alters how a space marine sleeps. This organ allows them to rest by shutting down portions of their brain while others remain active and alert. A space marine can effectively sleep while standing guard, half their consciousness resting while the other half monitors their surroundings. They need very little actual sleep, perhaps 4 hours in a 24-hour period, and that can be taken in small increments. But the initial implantation is a neurological nightmare, as the aspirant's brain must learn to partition itself, to function in this divided state. Many aspirants experience severe disorientation and what can only be described as waking nightmares as their minds adjust. The preomnor is a pre-digestive stomach implanted above the original stomach. It can neutralize otherwise poisonous or indigestible materials, allowing a space marine to consume virtually anything organic and extract nutrition from it. It also provides protection against ingested poisons. The implantation requires extensive reconstruction of the digestive tract, and the recovery period involves weeks of carefully controlled feeding as the aspirant's body learns to route food through this new organ. The omophagia is implanted into the spinal cord and represents one of the most unsettling modifications a space marine receives. This organ allows them to absorb genetic material and memories from consumed flesh. When a space marine eats part of a fallen enemy or fallen brother, the omophagia can extract memories, skills, and even emotional impressions from the tissue. This serves both practical and ritual purposes. Space Marines can learn enemy secrets by consuming their flesh, and many chapters have rituals where consuming the flesh of fallen brothers allows them to absorb their knowledge and keep their memories alive within the chapter. The multi-lung is exactly what it sounds like, a third lung that provides additional oxygen processing and allows a Space Marine to breathe in toxic atmospheres or even underwater for extended periods. Its implantation involves opening the chest cavity and rerouting major blood vessels, a procedure so invasive that recovery takes months. But once healed, the aspirant finds themselves able to breathe in environments that would suffocate ordinary humans. The oculobe is implanted into the eye sockets and modifies the eyes themselves, granting enhanced vision in low light conditions and improving focus and depth perception. The surgery involves keeping the aspirant awake while instruments probe into their eye sockets, a psychologically devastating experience, even for those who have endured everything else. But afterward, they see the world with a clarity and in lighting conditions that seem almost supernatural. The lineman's ear is implanted in the ear and enhances hearing while also improving balance and orientation. Space Marines can filter out deafening noise while enhancing quiet sounds, can maintain perfect equilibrium even when subjected to extreme acceleration or disorientation, and possess a sense of direction that functions even in total darkness or when subjected to powerful magnetic fields. The Susan membrane is implanted into the brain and allows a Space Marine to enter a form of suspended animation when mortally wounded. This organ can keep them alive in a death-like state for years or even decades until they can receive medical attention. For aspirants, learning that their body can now automatically shut down into a state resembling death is deeply unnerving, especially during the first unintentional activation when injury triggers the response. The melanochrome is a hemispherical organ implanted beneath the skin that monitors radiation levels and can darken the skin to protect against ultraviolet exposure. It also provides limited protection from other forms of radiation. Aspirants often see their skin tone change dramatically after this implant, sometimes becoming much darker, or in some cases extremely pale, depending on their chapter's gene seed and the specific mutations it has accumulated over millennia. The oolitic kidney is implanted in place of one of the original kidneys and provides extraordinary blood filtration. It can process and neutralize most toxins, poisons, and drugs, making Space Marines extremely difficult to poison and immune to most forms of chemical warfare. It also allows them to control their blood chemistry through conscious effort, enabling them to consciously activate dormant implants or regulate their metabolism. The neuroglottis is implanted into the mouth and nasal passages, granting Space Marines the ability to taste or smell chemical compounds and even track targets by scent. More importantly, it allows them to determine if substances are poisonous before consuming them, and to detect particular chemical signatures in their environment. This turns their sense of taste and smell into analytical tools. The mucranoid is implanted in the sweat glands and can secrete a waxy substance that protects the skin from extreme temperatures, and even vacuum for short periods. When activated, it coats the Space Marine's skin in a protective layer that insulates them from environmental extremes. The sensation of this coating forming is described as deeply unpleasant, like having one's entire body covered in a layer of warm wax. The Betcher's gland is actually two glands implanted in the mouth, either in the lower lip or hard palate. These glands synthesize and store a highly corrosive poison that the Space Marine can spit at enemies. The poison is acidic enough to blind opponents and, given time, can even corrode through metal. Space Marines themselves are immune to this poison due to the presence of the gland, but learning to control it, to avoid accidentally poisoning themselves before immunity fully develops, is a dangerous process. The progenoid glands are perhaps the most important implants from the chapter's perspective, as they represent the future of the chapter itself. Two glands are implanted, one in the neck and one deep in the chest cavity. These glands absorb genetic material from all the other implants over time, maturing into new gene seed that can be harvested and used to create future Space Marines. The neck gland matures after 5 years, the chest gland after 10. Every Space Marine knows that these glands are why apothecaries work so hard to recover fallen brothers from the battlefield. The gene seed must be preserved at all costs. The black carapace is the final and most distinctive implant. Sheets of a black, plastic-like substance are implanted directly beneath the skin of the torso. This carapace hardens on the outside while sending neural tendrils deep into the Marine's body. After it matures, interface ports are cut into its surface, creating the neural connection points that allow a Space Marine to fully interface with their power armor. Without the black carapace, power armor is just a heavy, cumbersome suit. With it, the armor becomes an extension of the Marine's own body, responding to neural impulses as smoothly as their own limbs. The implantation of the black carapace marks the transition from neophyte to full battle brother in most chapters. The surgery is extensive, covering the entire torso in this synthetic material, and the recovery is long and painful as the neural connections establish themselves. But once complete, when the neophyte dons power armor for the first time and feels it respond to their thoughts, moving with them as if it were their own skin, they understand that they have truly become something beyond human. Throughout this entire process, which typically takes 5 to 10 years to complete, aspirants undergo constant chemical treatment and hypnotherapy. The chemical treatments are necessary to prevent rejection of the implants, to correct imbalances, and to maintain the delicate metabolic equilibrium required for all these organs to function together. Space Marines never stop receiving chemical treatment. Their power armor contains drug dispensers that continuously monitor and adjust their body chemistry, and they undergo regular treatments throughout their entire lives to maintain stability. The hypnotherapy serves multiple purposes. It teaches them to consciously control implants that require mental commands to activate. It helps integrate the new organs into their sense of self. It continues the psychological conditioning begun during the trials, further reshaping their personality to fit the chapter's needs. And perhaps most importantly, it begins to fill their minds with the tactical knowledge, combat doctrine, and battle lore they will need as full Space Marines. By the time the transformation is complete, the person who entered the chapter as an aspirant has ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. Their body has been radically altered, transformed into something that is human only in the most technical sense. Their mind has been reshaped by years of conditioning and hypnotherapy. Their memories of life before the chapter have faded, becoming hazy and dreamlike, overshadowed by the constant presence of their new identity as a Space Marine. They are post-human now, transhuman warriors whose existence serves a single purpose: to wage war in the Emperor's name. Training and indoctrination, becoming a battle brother. The completion of gene seed implantation does not mark the end of a Space Marine's education, but rather the beginning of a new and even more intensive phase of training. The newly implanted Marine, now designated a neophyte, must learn to use the extraordinary abilities their new organs provide, while also mastering the weapons, tactics, and doctrines of their chapter. This training will shape them into one of the Imperium's finest warriors, but it will also complete the psychological transformation that began with recruitment, turning them into beings who think and feel in ways that separate them fundamentally from the humans they protect. Physical training takes on entirely new dimensions for a neophyte with a fully implanted gene seed complement. They must learn to control bodies that are radically different from what they knew before. They are now over 2 meters tall, with muscle mass and bone density that make them far heavier than their size alone would suggest. They possess 2 hearts, 3 lungs, organs that can filter poison, bones that can shrug off impacts that would shatter human skeletons. But these advantages mean nothing if the neophyte cannot use them effectively, cannot integrate all these new capabilities into a functional combat form. The training begins with learning to move in their new bodies. What seems simple, taking a step without crushing the floor beneath them, regulating their strength to grip a weapon without destroying it, moving through doorways designed for human-sized people, all of this must be relearned. Neophytes spend countless hours in combat cages, drilling basic movements until they become second nature. They learn to gauge distances with their enhanced vision, to filter sound with their modified hearing, to process the flood of sensory information their augmented senses provide. Weapons training intensifies dramatically. Neophytes must master the bolter, the iconic weapon of the Adeptus Astartes. This is not a las rifle or autogun that can be fired by ordinary humans. The bolter fires mass-reactive explosive shells the size of a human thumb, and the recoil would break the arms of an unaugmented human. Space Marines must learn to control this recoil, to fire accurately in full automatic mode while moving at speeds that would seem impossible for beings of their size. They train until they can field strip and reassemble their bolters in complete darkness, until they can clear jams and malfunctions by touch alone, until the weapon becomes an extension of themselves, as natural as their own limbs. But the bolter is only the beginning. Space Marines are expected to master a vast arsenal of weapons. Plasma guns that fire superheated matter capable of melting through tank armor. Melter guns that use subatomic agitation to create heat intense enough to vaporize ceramite. Flamers that project burning promethium across entire squads of enemies. Heavy weapons like las cannons and missile launchers that can destroy vehicles and fortifications. Melee weapons ranging from chainswords to power fists to thunderhammers, each requiring different techniques and fighting styles. A full battle brother must be proficient with all of them, able to pick up any weapon and use it effectively in combat. Tactical training runs parallel to weapons training. Neophytes learn the combat doctrines of their chapter, the specific ways their brothers fight, and the tactics they employ. They study the Codex Astartes, the great work penned by Primarch Robert Guilliman that codifies Space Marine warfare, learning the standard tactical formations and engagement protocols that have served the Imperium for 10,000 years. But they also learn their chapter's particular variations and specializations. An Ultramarine learns the precise, by-the-book warfare their chapter practices. A Space Wolf learns the savage close-quarters combat their chapter favors. A Raven Guard learns stealth, infiltration, and the art of striking from concealment. The hypnotherapy sessions that began during implantation become even more intensive during this training period. Neophytes spend hours in hypnomats, cylindrical chambers where they are plugged into input cables through the ports in their black carapace. In these sessions, they are subjected to hypnotic suggestions and visual and oral stimuli designed to imprint knowledge directly into their consciousness. Decades of combat experience, tactical scenarios, enemy weaknesses, battlefield protocols, all of this is compressed into hypnotic sessions that feel like they last mere moments, but leave the neophyte's mind packed with information they didn't possess before. This hypno-indoctrination goes far beyond just teaching tactics. It shapes the neophyte's personality itself, reinforcing loyalty to the Emperor and the chapter, suppressing emotional responses that might interfere with combat effectiveness, instilling the absolute conviction that they are right and their enemies are wrong. The process makes them susceptible to hypnotic suggestion for the rest of their lives, but it also hardens their minds against fear, doubt, and psychological warfare. A fully indoctrinated Space Marine can face horrors that would drive ordinary humans insane and feel nothing more than the cold determination to destroy the Emperor's enemies. Memory training reaches new heights during this period. Neophytes learn to use their enhanced neurological capabilities to develop perfect recall. They practice memorizing complex tactical maps after a single viewing, learning to review memories in their minds as if watching recordings, training themselves to catalog and cross-reference vast amounts of information. This is essential because Space Marines are expected to absorb and retain enormous amounts of data: the layouts of enemy ships and fortifications, the specific weaknesses of Xenos species and their weapons, the prayers and litanies appropriate for different combat situations, the faces and names of hundreds of battle brothers. All of this and more must be committed to memory with perfect accuracy. The indoctrination also includes intensive instruction in the chapter's history and traditions. Neophytes learn the deeds of their Primarch, study the great battles their chapter has fought, memorize the names and accomplishments of legendary heroes whose gene seed they now carry. They learn the chapter's particular rituals, the prayers they must recite before battle, the ways they honor their dead and maintain their equipment. This creates a connection to something larger than themselves, a sense that they are part of an unbroken chain of warriors stretching back 10,000 years to the Great Crusade itself. Most chapters assign neophytes to scout companies during the early years of their service. Scouts operate without the full protection of power armor, using lighter carapace armor that allows for greater stealth and mobility. This serves multiple purposes. It teaches neophytes to rely on their enhanced abilities rather than armor, develops their tactical awareness and fieldcraft, and allows them to gain combat experience in roles that, while still incredibly dangerous, don't place them in the most intense fighting where inexperience might get them or their brothers killed. During their time as scouts, neophytes learn reconnaissance, infiltration, and marksmanship. They deploy ahead of main forces to gather intelligence, mark targets for heavy weapons, and eliminate enemy commanders with sniper fire. They learn to move silently despite their massive size, to use terrain and concealment effectively, to observe and report with the precision expected of Space Marines. This period of service can last for decades, and many neophytes fall in combat during this phase, their potential never fully realized. The psychological changes that occur during this training period are profound and irreversible. Neophytes begin to think in ways that would seem alien to ordinary humans. They develop the ability to partition their minds, to analyze combat situations with cold logic even while experiencing the visceral rush of melee combat. They learn to suppress pain signals, to continue fighting through injuries that would incapacitate normal soldiers. Most significantly, they internalize the chapter's values and doctrines so completely that they become fundamental to their identity. This is also when many neophytes lose the last vestiges of their connection to their pre-Astartes life. The faces of family members fade from memory, becoming indistinct and dreamlike. Emotions associated with their mortal existence, the things they loved or feared or hoped for as children, all of this becomes distant and irrelevant. They are Space Marines now, and everything else is secondary to that identity. This is not a side effect of the process, but an intended outcome. A Space Marine cannot afford divided loyalties or emotional attachments that might interfere with their duty. The transition from scout to full battle brother is marked by significant ceremonies in most chapters. The neophyte is elevated in rank, assigned to a tactical squad, and granted the right to wear full power armor bearing the chapter's colors and heraldry. They recite oaths of loyalty, often in the presence of the chapter's chaplains or even the chapter master himself. They receive their personal bolter, often a weapon with its own history and honors, and they are welcomed as full brothers by the veterans they will fight beside. But this elevation is not an ending, but a beginning. A newly elevated battle brother has completed perhaps a decade of training, has mastered the basics of Space Marine warfare, has proven themselves in combat. Yet they are still, by the standards of their chapter, young and inexperienced. They will spend decades, perhaps centuries, continuing to learn, to improve, to internalize the lessons of warfare that can only be taught through experience. They have become Space Marines, yes, but what that truly means, the full weight of the existence they have embraced, they are only beginning to understand. Daily life. In a chapter. Between wars. The popular imagination of Space Marine existence focuses almost entirely on battle, on the glorious moments of combat where they face the Emperor's enemies in war. But the reality is that even the most active chapters spend far more time preparing for war than actually fighting. The daily life of a Space Marine, when not deployed to a war zone, is one of rigid routine, intensive training, and near religious devotion to the chapter and the Emperor. It is a life that would seem unbearably harsh to ordinary humans, but for a Space Marine, it is simply how they exist. The Codex Astartes prescribes a standard daily routine for Space Marines, though different chapters modify this schedule to varying degrees based on their culture and traditions. The routine is built around the understanding that Space Marines need very little rest and can function at peak efficiency on a minimal amount of sleep. A typical daily schedule might begin at dawn with morning prayer, where battle brothers gather in their chapter's reclusium or company chapel to recite litanies and devotions to the emperor. These prayers are not mere formalities, but genuine expressions of faith, reinforcing the religious component of Space Marine identity. Following prayer, the morning is typically devoted to combat training. This is not the kind of training that ordinary soldiers might recognize, with clear parameters and safety regulations. Space Marine combat training is conducted in the most hostile environments the chapter can create. They might fight in chambers filled with toxic gas to test their preomnor's effectiveness. They might train in rooms where the gravity has been increased to crushing levels, where every movement requires enormous strength. They might engage in close-quarters combat in environments designed to simulate the twisting corridors of space hulks or the rubble-choked streets of war-torn cities. This morning, training often results in serious injuries. Broken bones, torn muscles, and training fatalities are not uncommon. Space Marines train as they fight, with live ammunition and weapons at full power, because only this level of intensity can properly prepare them for actual combat. The chapter's apothecaries are kept busy treating injuries sustained during training, and it is considered a mark of shame for a Space Marine to let an injury interfere with their training schedule any more than absolutely necessary. Midday typically brings another period of prayer, though this may be shortened or modified depending on the chapter's practices and the day's schedule. This is followed by the first meal of the day. Space Marines require enormous amounts of food to fuel their enhanced metabolisms. They can eat virtually anything organic thanks to their preomnor, but chapters typically provide carefully prepared meals designed to provide optimal nutrition. These meals are not the bland nutrient paste one might expect, but often surprisingly sophisticated, as food represents one of the few pleasures Space Marines are permitted, and most chapters employ skilled chapter serfs as cooks who take pride in their craft. The afternoon brings tactical studies and training. Space Marines might spend hours reviewing battle plans, studying the tactics and weaknesses of potential enemies, or learning about new equipment and weapons. This training is often delivered through hypno-indoctrination, with battle brothers spending time in hypnomats, absorbing new information. They might also engage in war games and tactical simulations, working in squads or companies to solve complex combat scenarios. These exercises test not just their tactical knowledge, but also their ability to work seamlessly as a unit. More combat training follows in the late afternoon, often focusing on different skills than the morning session. If the morning was spent on hand-to-hand combat, the afternoon might involve marksmanship training, with battle brothers firing thousands of rounds to maintain their weapons proficiency. Or they might practice with heavy weapons, learning to coordinate fire with other squad members. Vehicle crews train with their tanks and transports, practicing maneuvers that push the machines to their limits. The evening brings the second and largest meal of the day, followed by another period of prayer. After this comes what the Codex designates as free time, though this concept varies wildly between chapters and even individual battle brothers. Some Space Marines use this time for personal reflection or meditation. Others maintain their weapons and armor, a task that is part ritual and part necessity, as the machine spirits that inhabit their war gear must be properly honored. Some chapters permit limited forms of recreation, though these tend to be competitive in nature, like dueling practice or marksmanship contests. Many battle brothers use their free time to study. The Fortress Monastery contains extensive libraries and archives, and Space Marines often spend their off hours reviewing historical records, studying the tactics of famous battles, or researching particular enemies they might face. Some chapters encourage artistic pursuits that connect to their culture, like the Blood Angels' famous interest in art and sculpture, or the Space Wolves' tradition of saga telling. But even these activities are approached with the same intensity that Space Marines bring to combat. Before rest, another prayer session occurs, often lasting well into what would be night for ordinary humans. Space Marines then take their brief rest period. Thanks to their catalepsian node, They need only about 4 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period, and this can be taken in short increments. Many Space Marines rest standing in their armor or sitting in meditation positions, their minds partially active even as portions of their brains cycle through the sleep states necessary to maintain cognitive function. This routine might seem monotonous, but it is frequently disrupted by the realities of Space Marine service. A chapter at full strength contains roughly 1,000 battle brothers organized into 10 companies. At any given time, several companies are likely to be deployed on campaigns across the Imperium, meaning that many Space Marines are away from their fortress monastery for years or even decades at a time. Those who remain garrison the fortress, train new neophytes, maintain the chapter's equipment and fleet, and prepare for their own eventual deployment. Life in the fortress monastery is shaped by its physical structure and the chapter serfs who maintain it. These massive fortifications are built to intimidate as much as to defend, with towering spires, vast halls, and chambers capable of holding the entire chapter. They are also deeply symbolic spaces, decorated with the battle honors and relics that represent the chapter's history. Banners captured from defeated enemies hang alongside the personal heraldry of legendary heroes. Halls of remembrance display the names of fallen brothers, carved into walls in endless lists that stretch back millennia. The chapter serfs who inhabit these spaces alongside the Space Marines are either failed aspirants who proved unsuitable for gene seed implantation, or people recruited from the chapter's recruiting worlds to serve in support roles. They handle the mundane tasks that keep the fortress monastery functioning: cooking, cleaning, maintenance, record-keeping, and countless other duties. To the battle brothers they serve, they are essentially invisible, acknowledged only when necessary and otherwise ignored. This is not cruelty, but simply the nature of Space Marine focus. Everything that does not directly contribute to their combat effectiveness is relegated to the background of their awareness. Some chapters have distinctive variations in their daily routines that reflect their unique cultures. The Space Wolves maintain great halls where the brothers gather for feasts and saga-telling, consuming vast quantities of food and specially prepared alcoholic beverages strong enough to affect even their enhanced metabolisms. The Dark Angels maintain a culture of secrecy and internal hierarchy, with inner circles of brothers permitted access to chapter secrets denied to others. The Black Templars, being a fleet-based crusading chapter, rarely gather in one place, their daily routine shaped by life aboard ships and constant warfare. The relationship between Space Marines and normal humans is another defining aspect of their existence between wars. When Space Marines interact with ordinary Imperial citizens, or even Imperial Guard officers, the difference in their nature becomes starkly apparent. They tower over normal humans, their presence physically intimidating, even when they intend no threat. Their speech patterns are often clipped and formal, shaped by decades or centuries of military protocol. They struggle to relate to human concerns that seem petty or irrelevant from their perspective. This creates a sense of isolation, a separation from the very humanity they serve to protect. Yet despite this separation, most Space Marines retain at least a theoretical understanding that they fight for humanity's survival. They see the ordinary people of the Imperium as those who must be protected, even if they cannot truly relate to them as equals or peers. This manifests in different ways across different chapters. The Salamanders are famous for their concern for civilian casualties and their willingness to interact with normal humans. The Marines Malevolent, by contrast, are notorious for their callous disregard for collateral damage, viewing civilians as expendable resources in the prosecution of war. The religious aspect of daily life deserves special mention. Space Marines are created to be the Emperor's ultimate warriors, and their entire existence is shaped by faith in him. The prayers and rituals that punctuate their daily routine are not mere formalities, but genuine expressions of devotion. They believe absolutely that they are his angels of death, that their purpose is divinely ordained, that their service is sacred. This faith is reinforced by the chapter's chaplains, warrior priests, who tend to the spiritual health of the battle brothers as carefully as apothecaries tend to their physical well-being. This daily existence, repeated year after year, decade after decade, shapes Space Marines in profound ways. They become creatures of ritual and routine, finding comfort in the familiar patterns of their lives. Change is viewed with suspicion, innovation treated cautiously unless it comes from the highest levels of chapter authority. This conservatism serves a purpose, creating stability and preserving traditions that have endured for millennia. But it also means that Space Marines exist in a kind of cultural stasis, their chapters changing only slowly over the centuries, maintaining practices and beliefs that might seem archaic or even counterproductive to outside observers. And yet, this daily routine, as rigid and demanding as it is, represents a kind of peace for Space Marines. It is time when they are not being shot at, when they are not watching brothers die, when they can focus on perfecting their skills and strengthening their bonds with their chapter. For warriors who know that their eventual fate is to die in combat, these periods between deployments are as close to rest as they will ever know. The experience of battle, war eternal, when a Space Marine chapter receives a call to war, when the Imperium requires the services of its finest warriors, the transformation that occurs is both subtle and profound. The rigid daily routine of the fortress monastery gives way to the focused intensity of combat preparation. Squads that have trained together for decades prepare to deploy, checking their weapons and armor with ritualistic precision. Chaplains deliver battle prayers, invoking the Emperor's protection and calling on the spirits of fallen brothers to guide their swords. And then, with the roar of drop, pods, or the hum of Thunderhawk gunships, they descend upon the enemies of mankind, and the galaxy burns. The experience of combat for a Space Marine is fundamentally different from what ordinary soldiers experience. Their enhanced physiology, their extensive conditioning, and their absolute faith combine to create a battlefield mindset that borders on the inhuman. When a normal soldier faces combat, they experience fear, adrenaline, the primal fight-or-flight response that humans have carried since before they climbed down from the trees. A Space Marine experiences something else entirely. The moment of deployment is a sensory overload that would overwhelm lesser beings. A drop pod plummeting through atmosphere experiences forces that would liquefy an unaugmented human. The noise is deafening, the violence of atmospheric entry shaking the pod like a child's toy. But Space Marines do not experience terror during this descent. Their hypno-conditioning has taught them to process fear as information to be noted and dismissed. Their bodies, secured in restraint harnesses within the pod, barely feel the crushing acceleration thanks to their reinforced skeletal structure and redundant cardiovascular system. They use these final moments before impact to review tactical data, to check their weapons one final time, to mentally prepare for the violence ahead. Impact is brutal. The drop pod punches through whatever surface it strikes with the force of a meteor, its melter cutters carving through rock or metal or flesh with equal ease. The instant the pod's doors blow open, Space Marines are in motion. They exit their pods with a speed and precision that seems impossible for beings of their size, weapons already firing, ceramite boots hitting the ground in perfect unison. The violence of deployment itself is a weapon, a psychological hammer designed to shatter enemy morale before the first shot is even fired. The actual experience of combat reveals the full extent of Space Marine capabilities. They process battlefield information at superhuman speeds, their enhanced nervous systems allowing them to react to threats faster than ordinary soldiers can perceive them. They see enemies before those enemies see them, courtesy of auto-senses built into their helmets and their own genetically enhanced vision. They move through the chaos of battle with perfect spatial awareness, always knowing where their squad members are tracking multiple threats simultaneously, calculating optimal firing positions without conscious thought. The bolter speaks with a distinctive thunder, each mass-reactive shell leaving the barrel with enough force to shatter bone and pulp flesh even before it detonates. Space Marines fire with precision that seems impossible in the chaos of combat, placing shots with mechanical accuracy while moving at speeds that blur their forms to normal human perception. They compensate for recoil automatically, their augmented musculature absorbing forces that would tear the arms from unenhanced soldiers. They clear jams and malfunctions without breaking stride, their decades of training making weapon manipulation as natural as breathing. Melee combat is where Space Marines truly embody their role as angels of death. They close with enemies at terrifying speeds, ceramite armor shrugging off rounds that would kill ordinary soldiers. Chainswords roar as their monomolecular teeth chew through flesh and bone and armor. Power weapons crackle with disruptive energy fields that can carve through tank armor. Thunder hammers fall with the force of artillery shells, crushing everything in their path. And through it all, the Space Marines fight with a cold efficiency that is more terrifying than rage. Because Space Marines do not fight with emotion in the way humans understand it. They do not hate their enemies in any personal sense. They do not fear for their lives. They do not experience the moral qualms that might cause a normal soldier to hesitate. They are weapons, and weapons do not question their purpose. When they crush an enemy's skull with a power fist, they feel only the satisfaction of a target eliminated, a threat neutralized. When they torch a building full of enemy combatants with a flamer, reducing dozens of sentient beings to ash, they experience no guilt or revulsion, only the cold knowledge that the Emperor's enemies have been purged. This does not mean Space Marines are emotionless automatons. They feel things, but those feelings have been channeled and focused by their conditioning into forms that serve their purpose. They feel pride in performing their duties well, satisfaction in a battle won, grief when brothers fall, loyalty to their chapter and the Imperium. But softer emotions, mercy toward enemies, compassion for those they must kill, existential doubt about the rightness of their cause, these have been systematically suppressed or eliminated. A Space Marine who began to question whether the enemies they killed deserved death, who wondered if their cause was truly just, would be identified quickly and either reconditioned or quietly eliminated. The psychological effect Space Marines have on their enemies cannot be overstated. Most Xenos and many heretics have never seen Space Marines before, have no frame of reference for what they represent. Then these titans in ceramite descend upon them, shrugging off fire that would kill tanks, moving with impossible speed, speaking in mechanically amplified voices that boom across the battlefield like the voice of wrathful gods. The psychological impact breaks entire formations, causes enemy soldiers to flee in panic or freeze in terror. This is by design. Fear is a weapon, and Space Marines wield it with the same skill they bring to their bolters and chainswords. But not all enemies break. The galaxy is full of horrors that fear nothing, that match or exceed Space Marines in strength and savagery. Orcs, for instance, exist only for war, growing larger and stronger the more they fight. They do not fear Space Marines but delight in facing such worthy opponents. Tyranids are utterly fearless, driven by hive mind imperatives that make concepts like morale or terror meaningless. Chaos Space Marines are fallen Astartes themselves, possessing all the same advantages while corrupted by the dark powers of the warp. Against such foes, the psychological advantages Space Marines normally enjoy evaporate, and battle becomes a brutal test of strength against strength. Space Marines process injury in ways that defy normal human experience. Their Larraman's organ causes wounds to clot almost instantly. Their redundant organs mean that injuries that would be fatal to normal soldiers barely slow them down. A Space Marine can fight with a destroyed heart, sustained by their secondary organ. They can continue even with catastrophic damage to their torso, their enhanced biology, and armor's medical systems, keeping them functional far beyond the point where ordinary soldiers would have bled out. Pain is simply information, acknowledged and then suppressed through conscious control of their nervous system. This ability to continue fighting through injuries creates a terrible momentum on the battlefield. Enemies watch as Space Marines take hits that should kill them and simply keep advancing. Bolter rounds tear into their armor, leaving gouges in ceramite but failing to penetrate. Blades find gaps in their protection, drawing blood, but the Marines fight on without slowing. It is demoralizing in the extreme to realize that your weapons cannot stop these warriors, that they will keep coming no matter what you do to them, that the only way to stop a Space Marine is to completely destroy them. The experience of leading normal humans in battle is particularly interesting for Space Marines. They often fight alongside Imperial Guard regiments or planetary defense forces, and the difference in capability creates its own challenges. Space Marines must consciously slow down, must remember that the humans following them cannot react as quickly, cannot process information as fast, cannot march for days without rest or food. Good Space Marine commanders learn to account for these limitations, to use their enhanced abilities to support and protect the normal humans they fight alongside. Poor ones simply charge ahead, leaving their mortal allies to keep up as best they can or die trying. The duration of Space Marine engagements varies wildly. Some battles are over in hours, drop pod assaults that decapitate enemy leadership and shatter resistance before it can properly form. Others drag on for months or years, grinding campaigns where even Space Marine endurance is tested. They can fight for days without rest, their catalepsian node allowing them to remain combat effective even as they rest portions of their brain in shifts. They can consume almost anything for sustenance, their preomnor extracting nutrition from sources that would poison ordinary soldiers. They are, in many ways, the perfect soldiers for extended campaigns. But even Space Marines have limits. After days of continuous combat, their reaction times slow fractionally. Their accuracy decreases by percentages that would be meaningless for normal soldiers, but that Space Marines notice and find troubling. Battle damage accumulates, armor becomes compromised, weapons develop malfunctions that field repairs cannot fully address. Brothers fall, squads become undermanned, tactical options narrow as casualties mount. And through it all, the survivors fight on, because that is what they were created to do. The immediate aftermath of battle is its own kind of combat. Apothecaries move across the battlefield, seeking fallen brothers, extracting progenoid glands from the dead to preserve their gene seed. Tech Marines assess damage to vehicles and armor, making what repairs they can in the field. Chaplains speak rites over the dead, ensuring their spirits find their way to the Emperor's side. And the survivors begin the process of transition from combat mindset back to something approaching their normal state. Though this transition is never complete, a Space Marine is always a warrior, always alert, always ready to fight again at a moment's notice. The psychological burden. Living beyond humanity. The transformation that turns a human into a Space Marine is not limited to their physical form. The most profound changes occur in their mind, in the way they think and feel and relate to the universe around them. These psychological modifications are essential to creating effective warriors, but they come with costs that are rarely acknowledged and never truly addressed. To be a Space Marine is to exist in a state that is no longer quite human, to experience existence in ways that separate them fundamentally from the people they protect. The first and most obvious change is the suppression of fear. Through hypno-conditioning and chemical treatment, Space Marines are taught to bypass the normal human fear response. When an ordinary person faces a terrifying threat, their amygdala triggers a cascade of responses: increased heart rate, tunnel vision, the release of stress hormones, the overwhelming urge to flee or fight, driven purely by instinct. A Space Marine experiences the same stimuli, but processes them entirely differently. The threat is identified. assessed for its tactical implications, and then addressed with cold logic rather than emotional reaction. This fearlessness is extraordinarily useful in combat. Space Marines can face horrors that would drive normal humans insane, can advance into situations where death seems certain, can make tactical decisions that require sacrificing themselves or their brothers without the fear of death clouding their judgment. But it also separates them from normal human experience in profound ways. They cannot truly understand civilian terror or why ordinary soldiers sometimes break under fire. They have no frame of reference for the courage required for a normal human to face combat, because they themselves do not experience the fear that courage is meant to overcome. The emotional flattening that accompanies Space Marine conditioning goes beyond just fear. Most softer emotions are gradually suppressed or eliminated. Compassion for enemies becomes non-existent, replaced by the cold calculation of threat assessment and elimination. Even positive emotions are muted. Space Marines feel loyalty and camaraderie toward their brothers, but these feelings lack the warmth and depth of normal human friendship. They are functional bonds, connections forged through shared purpose rather than genuine affection, though individual Space Marines might not recognize this distinction, having lost the ability to experience the fuller emotional palette they possessed before conditioning. This emotional modification creates a kind of dissociation from humanity itself. Space Marines serve the Imperium, fight to protect human worlds, die in defense of people they will never meet. But they do not truly connect with those people as fellow humans. They see them more as resources to be protected, assets to be deployed, populations to be defended in the same way one might protect ammunition stockpiles or defensive positions. This is not cruelty or callousness in any emotional sense. It is simply how Space Marines are conditioned to view the universe, prioritizing mission objectives over individual lives. The accumulation of violence over decades or centuries of service creates its own psychological burden. A Space Marine might personally kill hundreds of thousands of sentient beings over the course of a long career. Orcs, Eldar, Tau, human heretics and traitors, tyrannid organisms, corrupted cultists. The list grows endlessly. Each death is justified within the framework of imperial doctrine and chapter beliefs. Each killed enemy was a threat to humanity, a servant of darkness that deserved only destruction. And yet, the sheer scale of violence, the endless repetition of killing, leaves marks even on minds conditioned to process such things without moral complications. These marks do not manifest as guilt in any way a normal person would recognize. Space Marines do not wake in the night, troubled by nightmares of those they have killed, do not question the rightness of their actions, do not experience remorse. Instead, the burden shows in more subtle ways. A certain hardness settles into their personality over time, a coldness that goes beyond their conditioning. They become increasingly distant from anything that does not directly relate to their chapter and their duties. The already limited emotional range they possess narrows further, until some ancient veterans seem more machine than man, going through the motions of existence without any apparent internal life beyond the next battle. The relationship between Space Marines and time creates another layer of psychological complexity. Most Space Marines are functionally immortal, capable of living for centuries or even millennia if they avoid dying in combat. But this longevity comes with costs that are rarely discussed. They watch the universe change around them while they themselves remain largely static. Planets they protected are lost to Xenos invasion or heresy. Imperial Guard regiments they fought alongside are disbanded or destroyed. Normal humans they knew age and die within what seems like mere moments to a Space Marine who has lived for centuries. This creates a sense of isolation that deepens over time. Young Space Marines still retain some connection to the humanity they left behind, some memory of what it was like to be mortal. But ancient veterans, those who have served for 500 or 1,000 years, have long since lost that connection. They no longer remember what it felt like to fear death, to experience love or desire, to want anything beyond the next battle. Their memories of life before becoming Space Marines have faded into indistinct shadows, if they exist at all. They are creatures of pure purpose, warriors who exist only to fight, sustained by conditioning and faith, rather than any genuine desire to continue living. The knowledge that they are sterile, that they can never father children or create families, affects different Space Marines in different ways. Most accept this as simply another aspect of their transformation, another way in which they have been set apart from normal humanity. Their gene seed will live on in future generations of battle brothers, and that is legacy enough. But some, particularly those who still retain clearer memories of their mortal lives, experience this as a profound loss. They are the end of their genetic line, final expressions of bloodlines that might stretch back thousands of generations, and when they die, that lineage dies with them. The relationship with their Primarch creates another fascinating psychological dynamic. Every Space Marine carries gene seed descended from one of the 20 Primarchs created by the Emperor. This genetic heritage influences them in subtle ways, shaping their personality, their preferences, their very thoughts. Ultramarines find themselves drawn to order and structure, reflecting Reboot Guilliman's legacy. Blood Angels struggle with artistic impulses and barely contained rage, echoes of Sanguinius. Space Wolves feel the call of the savage and the hunt, Leman Russ's genetic fingerprint on their souls. But this influence raises questions that few Space Marines ever consciously consider. To what extent are their thoughts truly their own? How much of their personality is them, and how much is simply the expression of ancient genetic programming? When they make decisions, are they exercising free will or simply following patterns encoded into their gene seed millennia ago? These are dangerous thoughts, the kind that can lead to doubt, and doubt is something Space Marines are conditioned to suppress. So they do not ask these questions, do not examine too closely the foundations of their own consciousness. The potential for mental breakdown exists, though chapters work hard to prevent it. Space Marines who begin to question their purpose, who express doubt about the rightness of their cause, who show signs of psychological instability, are quickly identified and either reconditioned or quietly disappeared. The most common cause of such breakdown is prolonged exposure to the horrors of chaos, to the whispers of the warp that promise power and freedom from the chains of duty. This is why chaplains exist, to guard not just the spiritual health of the chapter, but also the psychological integrity of its members. Some Space Marines find solace in faith, developing a genuine religious devotion to the Emperor that goes beyond their conditioning. They see themselves as truly chosen, blessed by him to serve as his warriors. They find comfort in prayer, in ritual, in the belief that their suffering serves a divine purpose. Others develop more complex relationships with faith, going through the motions of devotion without genuine belief, sustained by duty and conditioning rather than true conviction. And a few, very few, lose their faith entirely while retaining their loyalty, fighting on not because they believe, but because it is what they were made to do, and they know nothing else. The loneliness of the Space Marine existence cannot be overstated. They are separated from normal humanity by their very nature. They cannot truly connect with their fellow Space Marines because emotional intimacy has been conditioned out of them. They serve causes and purposes larger than themselves, but those abstract concepts provide no warmth, no comfort, no genuine sense of meaning beyond the purely functional. They are the loneliest warriors in the galaxy, surrounded by brothers yet fundamentally alone, cut off from the full range of human experience by the very modifications that make them effective killers. Brotherhood and loss, bonds forged in fire. Despite the emotional flattening and conditioning that shapes Space Marine psychology, they are not entirely without connection to one another. The bonds between battle brothers, forged through shared combat and decades or centuries of service together, represent some of the strongest relationships these post-human warriors are capable of forming. These connections are not friendships in the conventional sense, lacking the warmth and emotional depth that characterizes normal human relationships. But they are real, meaningful, and sometimes the only thing that keeps ancient veterans tethered to any sense of identity beyond pure function. The squad is the fundamental unit of Space Marine organization and also the primary locus of brotherhood. A tactical squad typically consists of 10 battle brothers who train together, fight together, and often serve together for decades or even centuries. They learn each other's capabilities intimately, develop an almost telepathic understanding of how their brothers will move and react in combat. This creates a level of tactical coordination that borders on the supernatural. Squad members can execute complex maneuvers without verbal communication, each brother knowing exactly where the others will be and what they will do. This coordination is not born of affection, but of necessity and constant practice. Space Marines train with their squads endlessly, drilling the same movements and tactics until they become instinctual. They study each other's tendencies, learn to compensate for individual weaknesses, maximize collective strengths. The result is a combat unit that functions with mechanical precision, each member a component in a larger war machine. But within this functional relationship, something approaching genuine connection can develop. Veterans who have served together for centuries develop bonds that transcend the cold efficiency of their conditioning. They know each other's histories, remember battles fought decades ago, share references and in-jokes that newer members cannot understand. When a veteran brother falls in combat, the survivors feel his loss not just as a reduction in combat effectiveness, but as something deeper, though they might struggle to articulate exactly what they feel. This is as close to grief as most Space Marines come. A sense of incompleteness, the knowledge that a familiar presence is gone and cannot be replaced. The relationship between squad sergeants and their brothers carries its own unique dynamics. Sergeants are veterans, chosen for their tactical acumen and leadership abilities, responsible for coordinating their squad's actions and ensuring their effectiveness. A good sergeant knows his brother's capabilities perfectly, can deploy them optimally in any tactical situation, inspires through example rather than exhortation. The bonds between a sergeant and his squad can endure for centuries, creating a stable core around which newer brothers rotate as casualties and promotions create vacancies. Company structure creates another layer of brotherhood. Each company typically consists of 100 battle brothers, divided into squads and organized according to the Codex Astartes, or the chapter's particular variation. Companies develop their own identities and traditions, fostering a sense of belonging among their members. Competition between companies is common, with brothers taking pride in their company's combat record and accomplishments. This creates an identity hierarchy: first loyalty to the squad, then the company, then the chapter itself, each layer encompassing the smaller ones within it. The loss of battle brothers in combat is a constant reality of Space Marine existence. No matter how well-trained, how well-equipped, how genetically superior they are to their enemies, Space Marines die. Bolter rounds find the weak points in their armor. Plasma weapons superheat their ceramite until the flesh beneath cooks. Melee weapons breach their defenses. Orbital bombardments catch them in the open. Psychic powers overwhelm their mental defenses. The galaxy is full of things that can kill a Space Marine, and over a long enough career, most brothers witness the deaths of many comrades. Apothecaries play a crucial role in managing the chapter's response to casualties. Their primary duty on the battlefield is recovering gene seed from fallen brothers, but they also serve as the keepers of the chapter's genetic heritage and the memory of the dead. They maintain exhaustive records of every battle brother, documenting their service, their accomplishments, their manner of death. This ensures that fallen brothers are not forgotten, that their gene seed continues to serve in new generations of warriors that their sacrifices become part of the chapter's living history. The rituals surrounding death vary between chapters, but almost always serve to honor fallen brothers while reinforcing the living's commitment to the Emperor and the chapter. Some chapters inter their dead in vast catacombs beneath their fortress monasteries, crypts where thousands of battle brothers rest in perpetual vigil. Others cremate their fallen, scattering the ashes in significant locations or preserving them in sacred urns. Fleet-based chapters might commit their dead to the void, launching their bodies into the empty spaces between stars. The most honored dead, those heroes whose service transcends normal accomplishment, may be preserved in different ways. Some are interred within dreadnought sarcophagi, their broken bodies kept alive through arcane technology, while their consciousness is linked to massive war machines. This is considered both a great honor and a terrible curse, extending their service beyond the normal limits of mortality, but condemning them to a twilight existence, sleeping for centuries between brief periods of awakening for battle. The relationship between veterans and new battle brothers deserves special attention. Veterans, those who have served for a century or more, possess knowledge and experience that cannot be replicated through any amount of training. They have faced threats that newer brothers have only read about in tactical briefings. They remember campaigns that occurred before younger brothers were even recruited. This creates a natural mentoring dynamic, with veterans teaching newer brothers the practical lessons that can only be learned through experience. But this relationship is complicated by the emotional distance that characterizes Space Marine connections. Veterans do not mentor out of any warm desire to help younger brothers succeed. They do it because ensuring the effectiveness of newer brothers serves the chapter's interests. If a veteran takes a particular interest in a promising battle brother, it is because that brother shows potential to become an effective killer, not out of any personal affection. The mentorship is functional, focused entirely on combat effectiveness and tactical knowledge rather than personal development. The loss of particularly distinguished brothers affects chapters in ways that ripple through their entire structure. When a chapter master falls, when a legendary hero dies, the chapter mourns in its own fashion. Battle brothers who served with the fallen share stories of their deeds, ensuring their memory is preserved. Chaplains speak at length about their virtues and service. Their names are added to the rolls of honor, carved into the walls of the fortress monastery alongside countless others who gave their lives in service to the Emperor. Some chapters develop particular traditions around particularly catastrophic losses. The Crimson Fists, after their fortress monastery was nearly destroyed by an orc invasion, maintain a special remembrance for the hundreds of brothers lost in that catastrophe. The Lamenters, cursed by seemingly endless bad fortune, have developed elaborate rituals around honoring their disproportionately large number of fallen. These traditions serve to bind the living brothers together through shared grief and shared memory, creating cohesion even as individual members change over the centuries. The bonds between Space Marines, limited though they are by conditioning and emotional suppression, represent some of the most enduring relationships in the Imperium. Brothers who have fought together for centuries develop a wordless understanding that transcends normal communication. They know each other's capabilities perfectly, can coordinate tactics without discussion, trust absolutely in each other's reliability. This is not love or friendship in any conventional sense, but it is connection, the only kind these post-human warriors are capable of forming, and for many Space Marines, these bonds with their brothers are the only thing that makes their existence bearable. Service across centuries, the weight of time. The functional immortality of Space Marines creates a relationship with time that is fundamentally different from normal human experience. Where ordinary soldiers serve for years, or perhaps decades before age forces their retirement, Space Marines can continue fighting for centuries, even millennia. This extended lifespan would seem like a gift, an opportunity to accumulate vast experience and witness events across an almost incomprehensible span of time. But the reality is far more complicated, and for many ancient Space Marines, Their longevity becomes as much a burden as a blessing. A typical battle brother might serve for 200 to 400 years before dying in combat. This is long enough to see entire planetary populations turn over multiple times, to watch political regimes rise and fall, to witness technological developments and losses that reshape entire sectors of space. But it is also long enough to accumulate centuries of violence, to personally kill more enemies than most human soldiers would face in 100 lifetimes, to lose countless brothers to the endless wars that define the Imperium's existence. The psychological changes that occur over such extended service are profound. Young Space Marines, those with less than a century of service, still retain some connection to the humanity they left behind. They might remember faces from their former lives, even if the memories have become hazy and dreamlike. They might still experience something approaching curiosity about the worlds they visit or the people they protect. They might even, in rare moments of introspection, wonder about the lives they might have led if they had not been chosen for recruitment. Veterans with 2 or 3 centuries of service have long since lost these vestigial connections to their mortal past. They no longer wonder about roads not taken or feel curiosity about the broader universe. Their existence has narrowed to a laser focus on their duties and the next battle. They execute their role with mechanical precision, their decades of experience making them devastatingly effective warriors. But something essential has been lost along the way, some spark of individual identity, subsumed entirely into their function as Space Marines. The truly ancient veterans, those who have survived for 500 years or more, represent something even further removed from human experience. These warriors have seen so much violence, have existed in their post-human state for so long, that they seem more like living weapons than beings with any kind of internal life. They speak rarely, and when they do, it is almost always about tactical matters or chapter business. They participate in rituals and routines with the consistency of clockwork. They fight with an efficiency born of centuries of practice, but they seem to derive no satisfaction from any of it, simply continuing to exist and fight because it is what they were made to do. The accumulation of combat experience over such extended periods creates warriors of terrifying effectiveness. An ancient veteran has personally fought in hundreds or thousands of battles, has faced every major xeno species and most minor ones, has developed counter-tactics for enemy weapons and fighting styles that newer brothers have never encountered. They can read battlefields at a glance, anticipate enemy movements before they occur, coordinate complex tactics with minimal communication. They are, in many ways, the perfect soldiers, repositories of hard-won knowledge that cannot be gained any other way. But this knowledge comes with costs that are rarely acknowledged. The ancient veteran has also watched countless brothers die, has seen strategies fail and missions collapse, has experienced losses that would break normal humans. Over centuries, they have internalized the fundamental truth of Space Marine existence. No matter how well they fight, no matter how many victories they achieve, the war never ends. There is always another enemy, another battlefield, another brother to bury. This knowledge should lead to despair, to a sense of futility that undermines motivation. But Space Marines are conditioned against such feelings, so instead it simply makes them harder, colder, more focused on the immediate task rather than any larger purpose. The passage of time also creates practical challenges. Technology evolves, new weapons and equipment are introduced. Tactical doctrines are modified in response to new threats. Ancient veterans must continuously update their knowledge, learning new systems while maintaining proficiency with older equipment that might still see use. This is complicated by the fact that Space Marines, for all their genetic advantages, are not immune to the cognitive effects of extreme age. Their memories remain sharp, their reflexes still superhuman, but the sheer volume of information accumulated over centuries can make it difficult to access specific knowledge quickly. The relationship between ancient veterans and younger brothers creates its own interesting dynamics. Veterans are accorded deep respect based on their service and experience, their opinions carrying significant weight in tactical discussions and chapter decisions. But they are also increasingly out of touch with the concerns and perspectives of newer brothers, having long since forgotten what it was like to be young and relatively inexperienced. This can create friction, with veterans expecting absolute deference, while younger brothers sometimes chafe under what they perceive as outdated thinking. Some Space Marines who survive long enough begin to seek death in battle, though they would never consciously acknowledge this desire even to themselves. They volunteer for the most dangerous missions, take positions on the front lines where casualties are heaviest, fight with a recklessness that would seem foolish in less experienced warriors. They tell themselves they are simply serving the Emperor with maximum effectiveness, using their skills where they are most needed. But on some level, they are hoping for an end to an existence that has stretched beyond any natural span, seeking release from a duty that will never officially end. The oldest known Space Marine in the Imperium is Commander Dante of the Blood Angels, who has served as chapter master for over 1100 years and lived even longer than that. He is a living legend, revered across the Imperium as the epitome of what a Space Marine can become. But even Dante, for all his accomplishments, carries the weight of those centuries like a physical burden. He has seen the galaxy change dramatically over his long service, has watched brothers he trained personally die in battle, has led his chapter through crises that would have destroyed lesser organizations. There is something deeply tragic about Dante's continued existence. He wants to rest, to finally lay down the burden of command and service that has consumed more than a millennium of his life. But he cannot. The Blood Angels need him, the Imperium needs him, and he is too dedicated to his duty to seek death or retirement while he can still serve. So he continues, a warrior who has lived far beyond any reasonable span, sustained by conditioning, gene seed, and an absolute commitment to the Emperor that will not allow him to stop until something finally kills him. The perspective on time that Space Marines develop over centuries of service affects how they interact with normal humans and plan for the future. Short-term thinking, planning in spans of months or years, feels almost meaningless to warriors who have existed for centuries. They think in terms of decades or generations, making decisions whose consequences might not fully manifest for longer than most humans will live. This can make them seem callous or uncaring when they sacrifice current populations for long-term strategic gains. But from their perspective, they are simply operating on a timescale appropriate to their extended existence. Death, when it finally comes for ancient veterans, is often a relief as much as a tragedy. Brothers who have served for centuries finally receive the rest they have earned, their gene seed extracted and preserved to create new warriors who will carry on their legacy. Their names are added to the chapter's rolls of honor, their deeds recorded in the chapter's archives, and the surviving brothers continue the endless cycle of war that defines Space Marine existence. The wheel turns. New brothers take the places of the fallen, and the chapter endures across the millennia, a constant in a galaxy of change. Death and legacy, the final service. For all their genetic advantages, their power armor, their extensive training, and their legendary resilience, Space Marines are not immortal in any practical sense. They can be killed, and the grim reality of constant warfare ensures that most will eventually fall in battle. How they die, how their deaths are honored, and what becomes of their legacy after they are gone reveals much about the nature of Space Marine existence and the chapters they serve. Death in combat comes in countless forms for Space Marines. Some die instantly, killed by lucky shots that find the weak points in their armor or weapons powerful enough to simply overwhelm their defenses. A plasma weapon superheating their ceramite until the flesh beneath cooks. A power weapon carving through their armor in close combat. An orbital strike catching them in the open. These are, in some ways, the fortunate deaths, instant transitions from life to nothing. no time for suffering or awareness of their own end. Others die slowly, catastrophically wounded, but kept alive by their enhanced biology and armor's medical systems long enough to know they are dying. A space marine with a destroyed primary heart and damaged secondary organ, bleeding out despite their Laraman cell's best efforts. A brother crushed beneath rubble, his enhanced skeleton cracked and failing, unable to move, but still conscious. A warrior infected with toxins or diseases that even their preomnor and ulitic kidney cannot filter, their body fighting a losing battle against corruption. These deaths are harder, giving the dying space marine time to reflect on their service, to speak final words to their brothers, to prepare themselves for the journey to the Emperor's side. The role of apothecaries on the battlefield centers around the recovery of gene seed from fallen brothers. This is their sacred duty, more important even than treating the living. When a brother falls, an apothecary fights through enemy fire to reach them, extracts the progenoid glands that contain the precious gene seed, and secures them for return to the chapter. This recovery ensures that the fallen brother's genetic legacy will continue, that new warriors will be created bearing his gene seed, that his service to the Emperor will extend beyond his own death. But gene seed recovery is not always possible. Brothers lost in orbital bombardments or massive explosions, their bodies completely destroyed. Warriors whose corpses cannot be recovered from enemy-held territory. Battle brothers who fall into such horrific environments that their gene seed is corrupted beyond use, exposed to radiation or warp energies or xenos biotoxins that render it unsalvageable. Every such loss is a tragedy, not just for the individual brother, but for the chapter as a whole. A permanent reduction in their genetic stock that can never be fully recovered. The honoring of the dead varies significantly between chapters, reflecting their individual cultures and traditions. The Ultramarines conduct formal ceremonies, speaking at length about the fallen brothers' service and accomplishments before interring them in the chapter's vast crypts. The Space Wolves hold wakes, gathering to tell stories of the dead warriors' deeds while consuming vast quantities of their specially prepared alcoholic beverages. The Blood Angels create artistic memorials, sculptures or paintings that capture the essence of the fallen brother for future generations to honor. Some chapters maintain specific roles for particularly honored dead. Dreadnoughts are perhaps the most famous example, where mortally wounded space marines are interred within walking sarcophagi that keep their broken bodies alive while linking their consciousness to massive war machines. This is considered both a great honor and a terrible curse. The interred brother can continue serving the chapter for thousands of years, awakened for the most crucial battles. But they spend the vast majority of that time in dreamless sleep, aware that they have become more machine than man, cut off from the brotherhood they once knew, except during brief periods of wakeful service. Chapter Ancients, those dreadnoughts who have served for millennia, represent living connections to the chapter's distant past. They remember events that occurred before most currently serving brothers were even born, can provide counsel based on centuries or even thousands of years of experience. But they also represent the terrible price of such extended service. Many ancients have lost most of their human memories, their personalities eroded by the endless cycle of waking and sleeping. They serve with mechanical efficiency, but seem to derive no satisfaction from their continued existence, simply enduring because they were never released. The legacy a space marine leaves behind is measured not in wealth or descendants, but in service and gene seed. When a battle brother dies, his accomplishments are recorded in the chapter's archives, his deeds added to the chapter's history. If he distinguished himself particularly, his name might be inscribed on the fortress monastery's walls of remembrance, his armor and weapons preserved as relics. His progenoid glands will be used to create new space marines, and in this way, his genetic heritage continues even after his own death. Some chapters track lineages through gene seed, knowing which new recruits carry the genetic legacy of which ancient heroes. This creates a sense of continuity, a connection between the present and the past that reinforces the chapter's identity. A young battle brother might learn that he carries the gene seed of a legendary hero from centuries ago, and this knowledge can inspire him to live up to that legacy, to prove himself worthy of the genetic heritage he bears. The psychological preparation for death varies among individual space marines. Some, particularly younger brothers, still possess something approaching normal human fear of death, though they are conditioned to suppress and override it. They do not want to die, but will do so if their duty requires it, because their conditioning demands nothing less. Ancient veterans, by contrast, often welcome death when it comes. They have served for so long, seen so much, endured so many losses, that the thought of finally resting holds genuine appeal. The moment of death itself, for those conscious enough to experience it, is shaped entirely by Space Marine conditioning. There is no panic, no desperate pleading for life, no fear of what comes after. They die as they lived, focused on their duty to the very end. Their final thoughts are typically of the Emperor, of their brothers, of the chapter they served. They might speak final prayers or utter battle cries even as their life fades. They die as warriors, and for Space Marines, that is the only acceptable ending. Some Space Marines experience what their chapters describe as visions in their final moments, though whether these are genuine spiritual experiences or simply neural misfirings as the brain shuts down remains unclear. They report seeing the Emperor, radiant and terrible, welcoming them to his side. They see fallen brothers, long-dead comrades who fought beside them in wars decades or centuries past. They experience a sense of peace and completion, the knowledge that their service has been accepted and their duty fulfilled. The impact of significant casualties on a chapter can be devastating in ways that extend far beyond simple numbers. When a company is destroyed, when a particularly revered hero falls, when a catastrophic defeat occurs, the psychological effect ripples through the entire chapter. Brothers who survived grieve in their own limited way, feeling the absence of familiar presences, knowing that warriors they fought beside for decades or centuries are gone and can never be replaced. Chapters develop traditions around catastrophic losses that become part of their culture. The Crimson Fists maintain special observances for the day their fortress monastery was nearly destroyed. The Scythes of the Emperor remember the loss of their homeworld to a tyrannid invasion, the catastrophe that reduced them from 1,000 warriors to a handful of survivors. These remembrances serve to honor the dead while reinforcing the living's commitment to continue the fight, to ensure that their fallen brothers' sacrifices were not in vain. The ultimate legacy of any Space Marine is measured in a simple metric. Did they serve the Emperor faithfully until death? By this standard, almost all Space Marines succeed. They fight until they can no longer fight. They serve until they can no longer serve. And they die with their duty unfulfilled only because death prevented its completion. This is what the Imperium asks of them, and this is what they give, generation after generation, across 10,000 years of endless war. Their individual deaths might be tragic, but collectively, they represent the greatest sacrifice humanity can offer. Warriors willing to give everything, including their humanity itself, to protect the Imperium against the darkness that would consume it. Conclusion: the price of being the Emperor's finest. To be a Space Marine is to exist in a state that transcends normal human experience while simultaneously representing the ultimate expression of humanity's will to survive. It is to be transformed at the most fundamental level, to have your body rebuilt with organs that grant superhuman capabilities, to have your mind reshaped through conditioning that removes fear and doubt, to have your very identity subsumed into a role that defines your entire existence. It is to become one of the Emperor's finest warriors, an angel of death, a post-human being created for a single purpose: to wage war in defense of the Imperium. The Space Marine experience, from initial recruitment through centuries of service until final death in combat, reveals the extraordinary price paid by those who undergo this transformation. Young aspirants, many barely more than children, are taken from their worlds and subjected to trials that kill the majority of candidates. Those who survive face years of invasive surgery, having alien organs implanted into their bodies while awake and in agony. They undergo psychological conditioning that fundamentally alters how they think and feel, suppressing emotions and responses that define human experience. They emerge from this process as something no longer quite human, beings of tremendous power, but also profound limitation. The daily existence of a space marine, when not actively engaged in combat, is one of rigid routine and constant training. They spend their lives preparing for war, drilling tactics and weapons proficiency, studying potential enemies, maintaining the equipment that will keep them alive on the battlefield. What little time they have for themselves is typically devoted to chapter rituals, personal meditation, or pursuits that connect to their combat role. They are warrior monks in the truest sense, their entire existence shaped by devotion to the Emperor and commitment to their chapter. In combat, Space Marines are devastatingly effective, the product of genetic enhancement, extensive training, superior equipment, and absolute faith combined into the galaxy's most lethal warriors. They face horrors that would break ordinary soldiers and continue fighting through injuries that would kill normal humans. They are fearless, not because they are brave, but because fear has been conditioned out of them, replaced by cold, tactical analysis and unwavering commitment to their objectives. They kill with mechanical efficiency, feeling no guilt or hesitation, because their conditioning has removed those responses as incompatible with their function. But this effectiveness comes with psychological costs that are rarely acknowledged. Space Marines are isolated from the very humanity they serve, unable to truly connect with normal humans or even with each other in ways that would be recognizable as friendship or affection. They experience only a narrow range of emotions, the rest suppressed or eliminated by their conditioning. They serve for decades or centuries, accumulating violence and loss that would shatter normal psyches, sustained only by faith and the knowledge that their purpose is war, and they will serve until death. The functional immortality that allows Space Marines to continue fighting for centuries creates its own burdens. They watch the universe change around them, while they themselves remain locked in patterns of service that never truly evolve. They lose brothers constantly. Each death, another small wound that accumulates over time until ancient veterans seem more like walking scars than living beings. They continue because they were made to continue, because their conditioning will not allow them to stop, because they know nothing else and have lost the capacity to want anything different. And yet, despite all these costs, despite the transformation that removes so much of what makes someone human, Space Marines serve an essential purpose. In a galaxy of endless war, where humanity faces extinction from 1,000 different threats, where Xenos races and chaos corruption and internal decay all threaten the Imperium's survival, someone must stand against the darkness. Space Marines are that bulwark, the armored fist that smashes through enemy lines, the Emperor's wrath made manifest. They pay a terrible price for their power, but that power is used in humanity's defense, and without it, the Imperium would almost certainly fall. The transformation from mortal to Space Marine represents one of the most extreme sacrifices any human can make. Those who undergo it give up their humanity, not in the sense of becoming evil or monstrous, but in the sense of becoming something that transcends human limitations while losing much of what defines human experience. They become stronger, faster, more resilient, virtually fearless. But they also become colder, more distant, less capable of the emotional connections and experiences that give life meaning for ordinary people. They are weapons, yes, but weapons that were once human and retain some shadow of that humanity, even as they serve purposes that ordinary humans cannot achieve. The galaxy of the 41st Millennium is a dark and terrible place, where war is not an aberration, but the default state of existence. In such a universe, the Space Marines are both necessary and tragic. Warriors created through processes that would horrify any civilized society, serving purposes that require they become something beyond human understanding. They are the Emperor's angels of death, post-human warriors who stand between humanity and annihilation. And they will continue to serve, continue to fight, continue to die in defense of an Imperium that needs them desperately, even as it fears what they have become. This is what it means to be a Space Marine in Warhammer 40,000. This is the price paid by the Emperor's finest, the sacrifice made by those who would defend humanity, even if it means ceasing to be fully human themselves. They are legends, heroes, monsters, and martyrs all at once. They know no fear because fear has been taken from them. They know no rest because they were not made for peace. They know only war, and they will wage that war until the galaxy itself burns, or until the last of them falls, whichever comes first. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and the Space Marines are its most perfect expression. If you enjoyed this deep dive into what it's like to be a Space Marine, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There's so much more to explore in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and I'll continue bringing you comprehensive looks at the lore, factions, and stories that make this setting so compelling. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.